Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling a story that is just incredibly important for understanding Southeast Asia. We're looking at the modern history of Cambodia.
And it's a story that is both, profoundly tragic, but also a masterclass in how political power is won and, more importantly, how it's kept.
That's our mission exactly. We're going to trace this entire arc from the absolute peak of the ancient Khmer Empire.
Through the absolute horror of the Khmer Rouge genocide under Pol Pot, his whole Year Zero ideology.
And right up to the present day, the nearly 40-year strategic dominance of Hun Sen and the dynasty he has now cemented in place.
The central question here, the one we really have to grapple with, is this. How does a country go from one of the worst genocides of the 20th century, not into a thriving democracy, but into a highly stable, 4-decade-long autocratic rule?
And for you, the listener, how does this incredibly violent, specific history explain the tensions we're seeing right now, especially between Cambodia and its neighbors, like Thailand?
It's all connected.
It is. We've got a really heavy stack of sources for this. We're pulling from academic work that connects ancient temples to modern corruption, historical documents on the genocide, and very recent political reports on how this whole power structure actually works.
It's complex, and it's often brutal to look at.
It is, but it's essential. So, okay, let's get into it. And we have to start way, way back. Not with the 20th century, but with ancient grandeur, because the seeds of modern grievance were planted a very long time ago.
You're absolutely right. If you want to understand modern Cambodian nationalism, the rhetoric, the suspicion of its neighbors, you have to begin with the story they tell themselves about the Great Khmer Empire.
Often called Khmer AP in their historical texts, right? Or the Khmer Empire.
Exactly. And this wasn't just some flash in the pan. Its foundations go back to around 68 AD, in the Funan period.
And it just grows from there through the Chenla period until it consolidates into this massive regional power.
And that's the Great Khmer Empire, officially kicking off around 802 AD with Jayavarman II. And the sheer duration is staggering. It lasted for about 630 years, until 1431.
Just think about that. 600 years of dominance? That kind of sustained power is almost unheard of in the region's history.
And you can still see that power today, written in stone.
Yeah.
When people think of the empire, they obviously think of Angkor Wat.
Of course. And just the main temple, the walls, the moat, that alone covers about 3 square kilometers. It's huge.
But that was just the temple. The capital city, Angkor Thom, was something else entirely, maybe 10 times larger. A massive, highly engineered city.
That architectural ambition, it just screams of centralized power. The ability to command resources on that scale.
It does, but here's the critical part, the part that connects to everything that comes later. That grandeur came at a huge systemic cost.
This is where it gets so interesting. Building something like Angkor Wat, which took, 70 years? This is not a civic project.
Not at all. This is an exercise in forced, centralized labor. Think about the logistics for a second. Our sources detail this. You've got over 900,000 stones.
Each one weighing about a ton.
A ton. And they had to be quarried and brought from Phnom Kulen, which is about 40 kilometers away.
That alone must have been an incredible undertaking.
It required over 5,000 elephants just for the transport. And the human cost. Historians estimate nearly 10,000 sculptors and laborers died during the construction.
And this is the point that connects the past to the present. These monuments, built for the Devaraja, the god kings, they were built entirely by slave labor.
Exactly. Not by citizens paying taxes for a common good. This was the kingdom's entire economic output for decades poured into stone monuments to prove the king's divinity, his personal glory.
It's a rich cultural legacy, no doubt. But that focus, it became a huge economic weakness. They were prioritizing the symbol over the practical economy.
They absolutely were.
Yeah.
While they were building these massive stone testaments to themselves, they were neglecting what they really needed. A robust international trade economy.
And who was building that kind of economy right next door?
The rising power of Ayutthaya, Siam. They were focused on state revenues, on aggressive regional trade, while the Khmer were focused on monuments.
It's not that the Khmer kingdom wasn't wealthy. I mean, they had incredible agricultural richness.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks to their brilliant water management, the massive belay systems, these huge reservoirs, all linked to the Tonle Sap Lake.
And the Tonle Sap is a natural wonder in itself, right? It swells to this enormous size in the flood season.
It swells to nearly 25,000 square kilometers, a massive fishery and natural reservoir. And the belay system managed all that water, allowing for multiple rice harvests. They had food security down.
But food security isn't economic stability. Even a huge empire needs things from the outside.
And our sources point to one critical need.
Salt.
Salt. It's always the simple things.
It is. And the need for salt forced them into regional trade. There was a major trade route that went all the way to Karat, which was known back then as Kam Thaliso.
Which means White Sea Town. The White Sea Town. So despite their imperial grandeur, they were locked into this regional system. And when their own focus on monuments made them weak, that system turned on them.
The collapse finally came in 1431. The central authority, weakened by all this internal focus, just shattered.
And Cambodia entered what historians call its Dark Ages. The empire didn't just shrink, it fragmented into maybe 7 smaller warring kingdoms. Lovek, Udong, these famous names.
And this internal weakness, this centuries-long division, it happened at the exact same time that Siamese power was reaching its peak.
It was the perfect storm. The weakness was there for an external power to come in and not just influence, but completely dominate.
And that domination lasted for a very, very long time. This is a point that gets glossed over a lot. Our sources say that before the French arrived, Cambodia was under Siamese influence or direct control for around 432 years.
432 years. That's almost as long as the Great Empire itself lasted. It is a defining national trauma.
And it is the absolute bedrock of the nationalist grievance you see in Cambodian politics today.
The entire narrative, which is still taught in schools, is that Siam didn't just defeat them. They stole their civilization.
And this is taught through these powerful myths, right? Like the sacred bull.
The legend of Preah Ko Preah Keo. It's the perfect story to explain this. The bull was said to hold all the kingdom's wisdom, scientific texts, military strategies, everything.
And the story is that when Siam sacked the capital, Lubek, they took the bull.
They stole Cambodia's brain, its intellectual soul. And that's why Cambodia fell behind. It's an incredibly powerful narrative.
And it's not just ancient history. It's in modern textbooks. It's in pop culture. It fuels this persistent anti-Thai sentiment, especially among the youth. It's an easy explanation. Our decline was their fault.
So by the mid-1800s, you have this intense pressure from Siam on one side and from Vietnam on the other. The Cambodian monarchy, led by King Norodom, was desperate.
They needed a way out, a third option.
And that option was France. In 1863, King Norodom formally asked for French protection. He saw them as a necessary counterbalance, a powerful, distant shield to get out from under the control of his neighbors.
And that decision kicks off 90 years of French rule. First a protectorate, then a full-blown colony by 1893.
So they trade one form of domination for another.
A vicious cycle. And the French, they just reinforced that same top-down exploitative model. They used the monarchy, but they kept extracting wealth and ignoring the rural majority.
Which brings us right into the 20th century and the immediate prelude to the nightmare. We move from colonialism to the modern monarchy and the failures of Prince Sihanouk's neutrality.
The Sihanouk era, the 50s and 60s, it's often looked back on as this sort of golden age, especially in the cities.
There's some truth to that for the urban elite. Phnom Penh was genuinely prosperous. It was called the Pearl of Asia, and in many ways it was more developed than Bangkok at the time.
The numbers back that up. I saw in the sources that in the 1960s, the average income in Cambodia was around $300 a year.
Which was 3 times higher than the average income in Thailand. So on the surface, things looked good.
But here's that fatal flaw again, the echo of the past. That wealth was incredibly concentrated.
Hyper-concentrated. It belonged to maybe 20% of the population. The royals, the bureaucrats, the city merchants.
And the other 80%. The farmers in the countryside who were actually producing the wealth.
They were heavily taxed and systematically exploited. They saw none of that urban splendor. And that deep, simmering inequality is exactly what the Khmer Rouge would later tap into with brutal effectiveness.
On top of that internal division, you have the Vietnam War raging next door.
And Sihanouk tries to play this neutrality card. He wants Cambodia to be the Switzerland of Southeast Asia, not taking sides in the Cold War.
But that was impossible, wasn't it? Geographically, they were caught right in the middle.
He couldn't stop the North Vietnamese from using the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which ran right through eastern Cambodia. It was a vital supply line into South Vietnam.
And that drew the attention of the United States.
The direct and violent attention. The U.S. saw Cambodia as helping their enemy, which led to the secret, massive bombing campaigns in the east. This just further destabilized the countryside and pushed more rural people toward the communists.
So American interest plus the internal politics, it was a recipe for disaster for Sihanouk.
And in 1970, it all came crashing down. His own military leader, General Lon Nol, staged a coup.
A coup that was explicitly backed by the U.S., who wanted a friendly government that would fight the Vietnamese communists.
Sihanouk was out, a U.S.-backed military dictatorship was in, and the country was plunged headfirst into the war. And that coup, that single event, is what sent thousands of young, angry Cambodians, including a young Hun Sen, into the arms of the Khmer Rouge.
Lon Nol's coup was the trigger. It was the final push into the abyss.
It was. It marked the end of any hope for a peaceful path and opened the door to the absolute darkest chapter in the country's history, the Reign of Terror.
Let's talk about the Khmer Rouge. The name itself, Red Khmers, was actually coined by Sihanouk, wasn't it?
It was. He used it to describe the communist rebels fighting against Lon Nol. The movement had its roots in the anti-colonial Khmer Issarak, but it became something far more radical, with heavy backing from communist China.
And its leader was Pol Pot, Saleth Sar. He'd studied in Paris and brought back these extreme revolutionary ideas.
Very heavily influenced by Mao's Cultural Revolution. The idea was simple and terrifying. Purge all foreign and urban influence, destroy the class system, and force the country back to a pure agrarian utopia.
And they implemented that vision with chilling speed. April 17th, 1975. The Khmer Rouge take Phnom Penh.
And they immediately declare year zero.
This wasn't just a new government, it was a complete reset of reality.
Everything. Time, culture, society, money was abolished, schools were shut, religion was outlawed, intellectual life itself became a crime.
And the cities were emptied. Immediately, everyone was marched out into the countryside, onto these collective farms.
The sick, the old people, literally in the middle of surgery in hospitals. The entire urban population became a slave labor force for the state, which they called Angkor, the organization.
What's so unique about this genocide is that it wasn't really about ethnicity, like in Rwanda.
No, this was purely about class and ideology. The enemy was anyone with a connection to the old world. Intellectuals, doctors, monks, former soldiers.
Even just wearing glasses could get you killed, because it was a sign you could read.
They systematically broke up families, destroyed temples, they even executed babies to prevent them from growing up to seek revenge. It was just absolute ideological madness.
And the numbers. They're almost impossible to comprehend. In just under 4 years, between 1975 and early 1979.
The estimates are anywhere from 1 to 3 million people dead, out of a population of maybe 8 million, a quarter of the country gone.
And it's important to remember how they died. It wasn't mostly bullets.
No, bullets were too expensive. The vast majority died from starvation, from being worked to death on 14-hour days with almost no food, and from diseases that could have been easily treated. The entire country was turned into one giant, brutal prison camp.
And it is out of this total collapse of a society, this trauma, that the man who would define the next 40 years emerges.
Hun Sen.
Right. Let's move to Section 3. Hun Sen's path to power, and it's a story that is deeply tied to the very regime he helped bring down.
He was a product of that time, Hun Bunol, that was his birth name. He joined the Khmer Rouge in 1970 when he was just 18.
And he joined specifically because of the Lon Nol coup, right? He saw it as fighting American imperialism.
He did. He was a true believer, and he rose through the ranks incredibly quickly. By 1975, 1977, he was a battalion commander in the Eastern Zone, in charge of thousands of soldiers.
So he was an active, mid-level participant in the revolution that brought about year zero?
He was. And his legacy from that period is, well, it's very contested. He always maintains he was just a mid-level guy who disagreed with Pol Pot's extremism.
But the tribunals, the human rights reports, they suggest a more complicated picture.
They do. The ECCC, that's the UN-backed tribunal.
Yeah.
And reports from groups like Human Rights Watch link his command zone to some severe abuses.
Specifically, the massacre of the Cham Muslim minority, right? That happened in his zone.
It did. Now, his defense is that he was just following orders from Angkor and that he was already planning to rebel against the leadership's brutality.
But the brutality of that regime was so intense that eventually it started to eat its own. The internal purges began.
And they turned on the Eastern Zone, which is where Hun Sen was. That's what forced his hand. In June of 1977, he defected. He fled to Vietnam.
And this wasn't just a political decision, was it? There was something deeply personal driving it.
Immensely personal. I mean, he was already physically scarred by the war. He'd lost his left eye in the fighting. But the real catalyst was Angkor's control over his life.
They wouldn't let him marry his wife, Bun Rani.
And even more tragically, their first son, Kam Sok, was born in 1976 and died just 7 days later because of the horrific conditions. That personal loss, on top of the political purges, was the final straw. It became about revenge.
And his defection to Vietnam becomes the absolute turning point for modern Cambodia.
Because Vietnam, which was already fighting Pol Pot's forces on its southern border, saw these defectors as a golden opportunity.
They needed a Khmer face for their invasion.
Exactly. They backed Hun Sen and some other defectors to form the KUFNS, the Salvation Front.
And when Vietnam successfully invaded and drove out the Khmer Rouge in January 1979, Hun Sen's rise was just meteoric.
He was installed as foreign minister at just 26 years old. It's astonishing.
He quickly became deputy prime minister, and by 1985, at age 33, he was prime minister.
And that's the beginning of the four-decade reign, all built on that initial Vietnamese sponsorship.
But then the Cold War ends, and the international community tries to impose democracy with the 1993 UN-supervised election.
A massive, multi-billion-dollar effort to create a multi-party system. And it was supposed to be the Great Reset. But here's the kicker.
Hun Sen's party, the CPP, lost.
They lost. The Royalist Party, led by Prince Ranarid, actually won the election. The people voted for a change.
So what did Hun Sen do?
He just refused to accept the result. He used his control of the military and the state to basically tear up the election, forcing this completely unworkable two-prime minister coalition.
Ranarid as first PM, Hun Sen as second PM. It sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
And it was. It lasted until 1997, when Hun Sen ended the charade. He launched what everyone calls a bloody coup.
He violently overthrew Ranarid, purged his forces, had rivals executed, and just seized sole absolute power.
And that coup in 1987, that tells you everything about his political mindset. Power comes first, before democracy, before the Constitution, before anything.
Which leads us directly to the system he's built since then, the structure of the Hun dynasty.
And it is not a crude dictatorship. It's a very sophisticated, durable machine. Political scientists have a name for it.
Hegemonic electoral authoritarianism.
Right. It's a hybrid system. And this is so important to understand. He doesn't just rule by military force.
Yep.
He holds elections. He wants the legitimacy that comes from the ballot box.
But the whole system is rigged to make sure his party, the CPP, can't possibly lose. So what does that actually look like?
It looks like total control of every lever of the state. The media, the courts, state resources, the police, the army, it's all controlled by the CPP. So you can vote, but the opposition has already been neutralized.
We saw that just last year, ahead of the 2023 elections.
The perfect example. The only real opposition party, the Candlelight Party, was just banned on a technicality. Gone. And that's on top of years of jailing opposition leaders like Kem Sokha on completely fabricated charges.
So you have elections with no real choice.
Exactly. Reports from Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, they all say the same thing. It's an environment of fear. The elections are not free and they are not fair. The system is designed for one outcome only.
And that political control is directly linked to an architecture of incredible family wealth.
The numbers are mind-boggling. The Hun family's fortune is estimated somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion US. They control something like 18 different sectors of the economy.
And this massive wealth for the elite exists while, 40% of the population is living at or below the poverty line.
It's a stark contrast. And the source of that wealth, according to all the reports, is direct access to state assets, corrupt deals, and patronage.
You can see that patronage system perfectly in the title of Onka.
The Onka title. It's technically a high honor given by the king, but in practice, it's a status you buy.
For $500,000 US.
A donation of $500,000 to the government, which really means to the ruling party's inner circle.
And there aren't just a few of these people. There are over 3,000 Onka holders.
3,000. And they are the core of the system. High-ranking military, police chiefs, business tycoons. It buys them impunity, tax breaks, government contracts.
They dominate the economy, and in return, they give absolute loyalty to the Hun family. They're the glue holding the whole thing together.
And the very land of Cambodia has been reshaped to benefit them. Over his time in power, Hun Sen's government has displaced more than 500,000 families through land grabs.
500,000 families.
We're talking about over 3 million hectares of land, farmland, forests, just taken and given as concessions to these elites for private development. It concentrates wealth and disenfranchises the rural poor all over again.
And the final piece of this puzzle, the thing that makes it a dynasty, is the succession. In August 2023, Hun Sen steps down as prime minister
and hands the job directly to his son, Hun Manet.
But this was not a retirement.
Not even close. Hun Sen immediately secured two key jobs for himself. He's still the head of the ruling party, the CPP, and this is the masterstroke. He became president of the Senate.
Why is the Senate presidency so critical?
Because under the Cambodian constitution, the president of the Senate becomes the acting head of state whenever the king is out of the country.
So he holds the ultimate constitutional power. It's the ultimate safety net for the dynasty.
It guarantees that the family's control is absolute. And it's worth remembering that his son, Hun Manet, was born in 1977, right after his father fled the Khmer Rouge. He was raised from birth for this one job. The succession was the entire point.
Okay, so let's shift to how this absolute power is used, both at home and abroad. We're getting into what some analysts have called the rogue state personality.
It's fascinating to watch his foreign policy because it's not uniformly aggressive. It's highly calculated.
He's extremely careful with Vietnam.
Very cautious. Vietnam put him in power. They have a strong military, and they don't mess around.
Yeah.
As Hun Sen sees it, their approach is simple. If we fight, we shoot.
But towards Thailand, it's a completely different story. Aggressive, unpredictable, antagonistic.
He clearly sees Thailand as being constrained by its own internal politics. He talks about its peace-loving politicians. He sees a weakness there that he can exploit and pressure.
And this behavior, it's rooted in his own history, right? Surviving the Khmer Rouge, the purges, the coup.
It's created this high ego and a willingness to just break the normal rules of diplomacy. He'll make these dramatic threats, like using BM-21 rocket attacks, or leak audio clips about interfering in Thai politics.
He's signaling that he's not bound by the same constraints as other leaders.
And that same zero-tolerance approach is applied internally to anyone who criticizes him. He maintains control by making very public, very brutal examples of dissenters.
The case of Hun Manet is just a perfect example.
She was a social media influencer, and she was an Angkor. She paid her $500,000. And her crime was to accuse Hun Sen online of covering up military casualties.
The response was instant.
And absolute. She was charged with incitement, denied bail, and immediately stripped of her Angkor title and all her royal awards. The message couldn't be clearer. Your money and status will not protect you.
Then there's the journalist, Masera. He just reported on what citizens were saying about losing land near the Thai border.
A totally legitimate story. And he was forced to make this humiliating public apology directly to Hun Sen and his son, and then his media license was just revoked instantly.
Total control of the narrative.
And this suppression extends into some very dark places, like transnational crime. The reports on the scammer centers are horrifying.
These massive compounds, more than 50 of them across the country, where people are trafficked and forced into slave labor, running global fraud operations.
The scale of it and the government's complete failure to stop it raises huge questions about state complicity. It strongly suggests that powerful people in that Angkor network are protecting and probably profiting from these criminal enterprises.
And all of this power consolidation, it's reflected symbolically in the role of the king.
It is. It's a common observation that the king of Cambodia seems subordinate to and even afraid of Hun Sen.
Because he is. The reality is that while Cambodia is a monarchy on paper, the real power, the supreme power, rests with the political leader.
Which is Hun Sen. As head of the party and president of the Senate, his control is total. The king is a figurehead.
So after this incredibly intense journey, let's try to pull it all together.
We started with the Khmer Empire. Glorious, but built on a flawed foundation that prioritized monuments over a real economy, which made it vulnerable.
That vulnerability led to centuries of Siamese domination, which created this deep nationalist grievance that still exists today.
Then came the ideological trauma of the Khmer Rouge. Pol Pot's Year Zero, a genocide that destroyed the country's soul and killed up to a quarter of its people.
And out of that chaos came Hun Sen, a former Khmer Rouge commander who strategically defected to Vietnam and then ruthlessly seized power for himself in the 1997 coup.
And he built this durable system, this hegemonic electoral authoritarianism, based on suppressing all opposition and enriching an elite class through corruption and land grabs.
So the tensions we see with Thailand, the public punishment of critics, the scammer camps, none of it is random. It's the logical outcome of this political culture that was forged in violence and betrayal.
Hun Sen's power is a synthesis of everything that came before. He learned from the God Kings, he learned from the Khmer Rouge, and he learned from the Cold War superpowers. He took lessons from all of them to build a system designed to last forever.
Which brings us to the final thought. Now that the dynasty is in place, what comes next?
Well, given that the Hun family's power is now constitutionally locked in, with Hun Sen holding the ultimate authority as head of state whenever he needs it, The question for the future isn't if they'll stay in power. That feels decided. The real question is this. What external force, if any, could ever shift the balance of power away from this family party structure, and what cost would that change demand of the region?
A very sobering thought to end on. We hope this deep dive has given you the context to understand this incredibly complicated and important story. Thank you for joining us.